Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 6 and we are going to present about the country with the highest inflation rate. The country that we choose is Zimbabwe and Argentina. As you know, inflation, which is rising in price, can be considered as the gradual loss of purchasing power. The goods and services over time can serve as a proxy for the rate at which purchasing power declines. A unit of currency essentially buys less as a result of the increase in pricing, which is sometimes stated as a percentage. Meanwhile, the opposite to inflation, which is deflation, which happens when prices fall and buying power rises, can be compared as to inflation. So I will move on to the gainers from inflation. The first one, which is government with debt. The real worth of the government's debt may be reduced more easily when there is inflation, particularly if inflation is more than anticipated. This is true. For instance, in the 1960s, the government was able to offer government bonds at cheap interest rate because the markets anticipated little inflation. However, the inflation in 1970s was larger than anticipated and exceeded the return on a government bond. As a result, the actual value of the bonds decreased for their owners, while the real value of the government's debt decreased. The second one, which is landowners or owners of physical assets. Account owners may see a sharp decline in the real value of their savings during a period of hyperinflation. Owners of tangible things, however, frequently have protection. Land, industries, and other tangible assets will continue to be valuable. Assets like gold and silver are frequently in higher demand. During times of harvest, gold cannot be printed. It cannot be subject to the same inflationary forces as paper money. The last one, which is banks and mortgage companies. It often results in an increase in bank profit margins during periods of negative real interest rates. Lending rates are greater than saving rates due to base rates that are extremely close to zero and very low saving rates. Germany's high inflation during the years of 1922 to 1924, when it reached stratospheric levels, is a good illustration. Workers from the middle class discovered that their pension fund was useless in 1924 after investing a lifetime's worth of money into it. One middle class clerk cashed in his retirement fund after 40 years of service and spent the money on a cup of coffee. It caused a significant deal of panic, uncertainty, and confusion throughout this hyperinflation. In response, people made an effort to purchase anything tangible, such as buttons or clothing that could have more worth than money. So I'll move on to the losers from inflation. The first one, which is savers. When prices increase, money loses its value, which reduces the real worth of savings. People who had saved their entire lives, for instance, would see the value of their savings destroyed during periods of hyperinflation, since, due to increasing prices, their savings are essentially useless. As for the second one, which is workers on fixed wage contracts. Let's say that wages are frozen for workers and inflation rises to 5%. It indicates that their salaries by 5% less at the end of the year than they did at the beginning, because they have less negotiating ability to demand higher nominal salaries to keep up with growing inflation. Employees in non-unionized jobs may be severely harmed by inflation. The last one, which is borrowers on variable mortgage loan. The government or central bank may raise interest rates in response to an increase in inflation. A higher borrowing rate will result from this. As a result, homeowners with variable mortgage rates may experience considerable increases in their monthly mortgage payments. The UK enjoyed an economic boom in the late 1990s. Economic growth was strong, but inflation rose by about 10% as a result of the economy overheating. The government raised interest rates. Mortgage expenses increased quickly at this time, which was widely unanticipated. A lot of homeowners discovered that they couldn't afford increased mortgage payment and stopped making them. That's all from me, so I will pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
I will explain about data inflation. As we can see, in 2018, Zimbabwe inflation rate increasing up to 10.6% and started to jump sharply to 577.21% in 2020. Estimated that after that, there will be increased percent balance. However, Zimbabwe has a long history of bad money management, including one of the worst cases of hyperinflation. So this term, unlikely, this shows that the highest inflation rate in 2020. Next, as we can see, inflation in Argentina was both 54% in 2019, before falling to 42% in 2020, due to Argentina fluctuating economic instability over the 20th century. The largest factor in its current economy status is the legacy of poor fiscal discipline left by the economy depressions from 1998 to 2002. Although data is not available from 2014 to 2006, Argentina inflation rate has been among the highest in the world for the past 5 years. Thus, this shows that the highest inflation rate is in 2020. Next, comparison on between inflation rate. The figures not have a specific inflation target, although policymakers believe 2% or less in desirable. However, Zimbabwe has a very bad inflation compared to Argentina. Zimbabwe has a very high inflation percentage in 2019 to 5.29% and in 2020 5.7.21%. This is because Zimbabwe's hyperinflation was attributed to numerous economic shocks. The national government increased the money supply in response to rising national debt. There was significant decline in economic output and export, and political cooperation was completely fundamental with economy. Lastly, Argentina inflation rate rose not easily 100% when compared to Zimbabwe. But Argentina inflation increases every year. To compare an inflation rate in 2019, Argentina get 53.55% and met a decrease of rate in 2020 to 42.02%. The latest inflation rate in Argentina in 2020 was 7.37%, which means there's an increase in rate from 2020. This is because the price of all goods are going up. The main thing that causes inflation of Argentina are an increase in the money supply, low interest rate from the central bank, and the expectation of inflation.
My name and I will be presenting about the factor of inflation in two countries, which is Zimbabwe and Argentina. Let's start with Zimbabwe country. Hyperinflation in Zimbabwe is an ongoing period of currency instability in Zimbabwe, begin in February 2007 until now. In the late 1990s, the government instituted land reforms intended to evict white landowners and place their holdings in the hands of black farmers. However, many of the new farmers had no experience or training in agriculture. Many farms simply fell into disrepair or were given to Mugabe loyalists. The next factor is unemployment that rose to 80% until the life expectancy dropped. Whites fled the country en masse, taking much of the nation's capital. From 1999 to 2009, the country experienced a sharp drop in food production and in all other sectors. Other sector that affected by this factor was the banking sector. The bank was collapsed with farmers unable to obtain loans for capital development. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe blamed the hyperinflation on economic sanction imposed by the United States of America, the IMF, and the European Union. Next effect was food output fell about 45% and manufacturing output fell by 29% in 2005, 26% in 2006, and 28% in 2007. Next, monetary policy mismanagement by Zimbabwe President Robert Mugabe and his government has become one of the causes of the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe. Then, the Zimbabwe government printed vast sums of new currency to finance military action in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This directly violates the quantity theory of money, which states that the price of goods and services is positively correlated to the amount of money in circulation. Next, we move to inflation in Argentina. There were several factors that caused an inflation in Argentina, which is the first one was the government deficit budget or government debt that was high until it default of the country. Also, a high unemployment and a natural disaster that happened in 2018. So the first factor was about the government deficit budget. Argentina started with the level of the debt is small and relatively stable during the first sub-period. However, starting in 1975 and until the default of 1982, the yearly average growth rate of the debt was close to 30%. The second factor was unemployment reached unprecedented levels and the poverty rates rose above 40%. The crisis was very expensive in terms of its effect on public debt as the jump in 2002. Social unrest during and following the financial crisis principally took the form of social protests. Furthermore, the protests of December 2001 were not a homogeneous phenomenon, but involve different social sectors, each with different motivations and behavior, with much of the protest being either fomented or taken advantage of by political groups, which make the inflation increase. Lastly, an intense drought affected Argentina during late 2017 and early 2018. The drought had large impacts on production and yields of summer crops, maize and soybean. When propagated throughout Argentina's economy, crop losses about 1,550 USD had an overall impact 3 times higher, about 4,600 USD. Impacts on cattle were lower than on previous drought because of the intensification of production systems, including shifting cattle to feedlots where forage was externally produced.
So today, I will explain about the counter-reflection to inflation occurred in Zimbabwe and Argentina. So as you may know, the economy has been completely disrupted by some of the greatest levels of hyperinflation ever recorded, resulting in a decline in living standards. By taking into account Zimbabwe's hyperinflation, Zimbabwe may change its continuous deficits into surpluses throughout the 2019 until 2020 period, establishing the foundation for stability by combining fiscal consolidation and enhancing its revenue base. Due to hyperinflation in 2009, the US dollar was replaced for the Zimbabwean dollar as the currency. The government also stopped releasing official inflation data during the peak of the crisis, but an estimate for mid-November 2008 put the rate of 89.76% compared to the prior year. At the time, the 100 trillion Zimbabwean dollar bills were viewed as a symbol of the country's failing economy. A decade later, the local currency was reintroduced. However, its value has once again decreased. Zimbabwe, however, then took initiative step in 2015 by officially abandoning the Zimbabwe dollar and adopting a temporary multi-currency system. This system can provide a long-term commitment and get rid of transactional problems. Additionally, it must be an alternative that the market will accept as having the ability to bring stability. And then they also established a new Zimbabwe dollar as the national currency in 2019, together with a foreign exchange, foreign currency auction system in 2020 to improve market transparency and enable the discovery of a market-based exchange rate. Moreover, Zimbabwe has started selling gold coins to the general population in an attempt to control the inflation that has gotten out of hand and will further depreciate the country's fragile currency in 2020. In an attempt to increase public confidence in the national currency, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, the nation's central bank, issued an interesting declaration. The central bank's prime interest rate increased to 200% if the yearly rate of inflation reached 190%. Each coin will be priced at the price of an ounce of gold on the world market plus 5% for production costs. Moving on to the next slide, I will explain about the initiatives that took by Argentina. For your knowledge, Argentina is one of the countries with the highest inflation rates. Argentina has through a severe economic crisis from 1998 to 2020. However, after the economic shock of 1998, the Argentine economy started to show the indications of recovery between 1999 and 2000. At this time, Fernando de Lara took power and implemented the first of 3 tax increase measures. However, rather than boosting public trust in government expenditure, the tax increase had the opposite effect. The tax increase made business hesitant to borrow money for investment and growth, which decreased the government's tax earnings. Argentina implemented a currency bond, a restricted monetary system in 1990. Every unit of the domestic currency in this situation, the peso in Argentina, is backed by an equal number of units. In this case, one of the dollars or other foreign currencies in the central bank's vault behind a currency bond. The only time the central bank is allowed to expand the money supply is when additional dollars are entering its accounts. The currency bond also prevents the central bank from willingly issuing currency. Despite Duhalde having replaced Rod Grace as the government's Minister of Economy, Nestor Kirchner was elected President of Argentina on May 25, 2003. The cheaper peso has made Argentina's exports more accessible and competitive worldwide. This demonstrates how the government decreased inflation by encouraging exports and making it simpler for businesses to obtain financing. The government also fixed the tax monitoring and gave money for social welfare, gradually restoring the confidence of the populace.
Now we present the usage of overcoming policies for the next inflation in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe's economy has begun to grow after a decade of economic decline and inflation. The nation's economic recovery has been aided by significant improvement in economic policies, but significant policy challenges and vulnerabilities must still be addressed. These are the types of policies usage for overcoming the inflation in Zimbabwe. First are the multi-currency system. In a multi-currency system, transactions in hard foreign currency are permitted under the system. Tax payments must be made in foreign currency, and the exchange system is largely liberalized. The multi-currency system aided the economy's remonetization and financial reintermediation, helped enforce fiscal discipline by prohibiting inflationary budget financing, and brought greater transparency in pricing and accounting after a long period of high inflation. As a result, the price level in US dollar fell in 2009 as the economy began to recover. The government regards the multi-currency monetary regime as a temporary arrangement that will last until at least 2012. The necessary improvements include aligning legislation, including the RBZ Act, with the prevalent practice of using multiple currency, increasing transparency in exchange controls, and facilitating corn supply. Then, Zimbabwe has implemented alternative policies for the monetary regime, which is hard-baked. The main advantage are lower inflation, deeper financial intervention, and eventually better growth performance, which will occur under certain credibility, enhancing institutional conditions. First are the anchor currency. The choice of the anchor currency is the most important decision in any fixed exchange rate regime, including official dollarization. The advantage and disadvantage of a particular currency will be determined by whether Zimbabwe and the anchor currency country meet the criteria for an optimal currency area. The South Africa rand and the US dollar have both been considered as possible anchor currencies in the case of Zimbabwe. Next are the trade policies. Because of South Africa's importance, a hard peg to the rand will lower trading costs and encourage further trade integration between the two countries. A hard peg to the rand if Zimbabwe joined the South Africa Customs Union, or known as SACU, would strengthen economic integration with South Africa and the countries whose currencies are pegged to the rand in part due to the absence of exchange rate fluctuation. As a result, real effective exchange rate volatility will be reduced. And lastly are the fiscal transfers. Foreign fiscal transfer will help to offset the cost of losing monetary independence. If more fiscal resources become available from abroad in the event of a negative shock to Zimbabwe's economy, the cost will be reduced. Zimbabwe could potentially join SACU, which has a revenue sharing formula that favors foreign members countries. So that's all from me. I'll be passed to the next presenter. Thank you.
Next, I will present the list of overcoming policies for the next inflation for the Argentina. Argentina competed with other South American countries and a few countries in other parts of the world for the dubious honor of having the world's highest inflation rate. These are the policies that are used to combat inflation. Firstly, monetary reform. Argentina, like many other chronically inflationary economies, experienced cycles of hyperinflation followed by stabilization. As inflation rises, political pressure to reduce it grows, eventually leading to monetary reform. Such reforms typically include the introduction of a new currency, which is convenient because inflation has typically moved nominal prices of goods and services into the thousands, millions, billions, or even trillions of units of the old currency. These rules are frequently monetary in nature, with the central bank promising to keep the growth rate of the money supply within specific limit. Under a so-called exchange rate rule, countries sometimes promise to keep the foreign exchange rate stable, which is the amount of domestic currency required to buy $1 in the foreign exchange market. Secondly, annexation of contracts and payment. Contracts and payment annexation is another common defense mechanism. This entails incorporating an inflation-based adjustment of all nominal payments into the contract to account for changes in the price level. Although annexation is extremely beneficial in assisting an economy to cope with high inflation, it can contribute to inertia, making it more difficult for the central bank to reduce inflation. Wages or whatever payment is provided for in the contract may continue to rise after inflation has dropped in some types of index contracts. This causes wage costs to rise further and forces firms to raise prices even after the monetary expansion. And lastly, currency board. Argentina implemented a currency board, a suffocating monetary system. Under a currency board, each unit of the domestic currency in Argentina case, the peso is backed by a corresponding number of units of dollars or other foreign currency in the central bank's vault. Only when more dollars enter the central bank's coffers, such as when the country runs a trade surplus, is the central bank permitted to increase the money supply. This effectively eliminates the possibility of increasing the money supply for fiscal reasons. The Argentina Central Bank agreed to exchange dollars for pesos on a one-for-one basis. Anyone bringing in a peso could receive a dollar in exchange. A currency board eliminates the central bank's ability to issue money voluntarily. For the conclusion, midway through 2021, there was a global rise in inflation, with several countries seeing the highest rate in many years. It has been linked to a number of factors, including the pandemic's impact on the global economy and the fiscal and monetary stimulus measures taken in relation to the epidemic by governments and central banks worldwide in 2020 and 2021. Through 2021, unexpected demand rebound resulted in record and widespread supply constraints, including chip and energy shortages, which were accompanied by rising consumer demand. The global building industry also was affected. The country having the highest inflation at the moment in Zimbabwe. Prices for both products and services increased in Zimbabwe, notably for food, since the country was suffering from a drought that caused harvest to fail. The country's currencies also keep declining. Argentina experienced a 71% inflation rate as of July 2022. The inflation rate was really the highest since 1992. Meanwhile, in 2022, Argentina continued hyperinflation is increasing. Prices were higher in 2022 than they were in 2021. Argentina has struggled with inflation for a number of years. The fact that the interest rate has reached such heights speaks volumes about the country's economic problems. The worst current economic troubles are not the only cause of this high inflation rate. They frequently indicate widespread and ongoing economic mismanagement, which the current crisis has only contributed to deepen. For Argentina and Zimbabwe to be able to control the inflation rate, the government and central bank must control inflation.